Welcome to another edition of Affinity Talks Gospel Podcast. We are privileged to have Alex, who can talk to us about the work of faith in later life. So introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Graham. It's great to be here today. Yes, I'm Alex. I live in the West Country and I lead the Christian charity Faith in Later Life. I come with a passion for evangelism and for older people, and just this real need for everybody to come to know Jesus. And of course, with older people, that gets more urgent. And so it's been great to take on this role these past few months.
Had you heard of Faith in Later Life before you got the job?
Yes, because I was leading a seniors ministry a few years ago when Faith in Later Life first began. And so I was actually one of our first church champions at that time. And I was also connected with the CEO of that time, and I supported him at a local event in Bristol. So yeah, I was really blessed by the resources even then. And it's great to now be a part of that work.
Brilliant. Well, tell us a bit more about the work of Faith in Later Life and the kind of heart and the vision, and practically what do you actually do?
Yeah, so our sort of strapline talks about inspiring and equipping Christians to reach, serve, and empower older people. It's hard to work out what that actually means, so I break it down. For me, it's very much about three things for the season ahead. So first of all, we believe that older people should come to know the good news of Jesus and that we need to be proactive in doing that. We believe that we are called to lifelong discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
Discipleship should never be something that we used to do. And so we encourage churches and older people themselves to keep on digging deep, getting to know Jesus more closely. We believe that that level of discipleship is what will sustain us all through the hardest times of our life, whether that's in old age or even some of the challenges that we face in younger years. And thirdly, to me, it's about responding and helping older people to continue to respond to God's lifelong call to be disciple makers. So that's not something, it doesn't say in the Bible that we ever retire from that. He never puts a stop to the Great Commission, depending on age. And so we encourage and equip older people to keep on sharing the good news of Jesus. We know that that looks different when you're 30 and when you're 80, but there's always ways, and God always has ways of helping us step into that ministry. So that's what it's about. The way that we do that equipping and encouraging and preparing is through our church champion network. So we have 900 church champions at the moment. We'd love some more if anyone's interested. But these are the people who have a heart for older people in their churches. They're often the people leading the luncheon club. Sometimes they're the people leading the entire church. And we invite them to come and be equipped by us. And so what we do is we have a website full of resources that they can access on some of the later life issues that they might be grappling with as a church. For example, like things like dementia, loneliness, how to share Jesus in a rural context with older people, all sorts of things like that. And so we have the website, we have a training event every other month to help equip people in some of the core issues around how to share the gospel with older people, how to disciple older people, and practical ideas of how people can continue to serve. And we also have networking events. So we know that people working in seniors ministry are under-celebrated and perhaps undervalued. They're often the people quietly getting on with it. So we gather them together and we cheer them on, we pray with them, and we listen and encourage them in this life-giving work that they're doing. So those are some of the core things that we offer. Above and beyond that, we know that we can't operate in a vacuum. We're living in a culture and a society that isn't actually geared up for our aging population, that it has some ageist tendencies. And so I speak into the media about subjects like loneliness and ageism, so that actually over time we hope that we can begin to shift culture so that people will embrace our older friends and ourselves as we age. We have a vested interest to make the landscape for older people more pleasant, because if we're breathing, we're aging, and we're all going to get there ourselves too.
Yeah, oh, it's a really good explanation. Thank you, and it's fantastic work. In a way, what you described in terms of reaching and serving and empowering is what the church should be doing more generally. But obviously, your particular focus is on those kind of retired and beyond. Um, just a sort of slight aside, but connected. I was took some time out last week and was listening to the Thursday Murder Club stories, because they're
Mm.
connected with someone locally who went to school here locally, and his mum was a teacher of my son, and it was Richard Osman. And the kind of basic premise of all of those n- novels, would you call them anyway? Books is
Mm.
you got a group of people in an old people's home who are mostly in their 80s who are solving murders, and it's a really there are lots of challenges in the book because there are some philosophies, and particularly about dementia and assisted dying, which are not good. But actually, affirming that people in their 80s can solve murders is quite a healthy thing to get you thinking about. So although they act as old people and make lemon meringue pie and get obsessed with all sorts of things like older people might do, they're also very valuable and they're making a contribution. So it kind of made me think about older people's ministry as well, and how the regular guys in the police force are writing these guys off who are over 80s, and the
Mm.
the great sort of comic value is that they end up solving the mysteries, and the police are sort of semi incompetent.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that really sort of connects in with that. I had a question, which was the why, really, because what you've described sounds brilliant. Um, but why is it necessary if there's churches up and down the country who have older people in them and have younger people in them and should be working as families, and why would it be necessary to have a kind of parachurch organization to focus specifically on that, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it really comes back to those three issues. And I think you'll find that there are many churches up and down the country who may well have lots of older people very willing and very happy to be there. They
Mm,
don't necessarily know Jesus. They could be there out of tradition. They
yeah.
could be there for other, for friendships and those things. Also, that people aren't necessarily being discipled in later life. It is all about the younger people, and we're not necessarily helping to engage older people to continue pressing into change. Older people, over time, the longer we go on, the more disappointments we suffer in life. That can lead to bitterness. And,
Mm,
are we helping our older friends in church actually navigate some of that stuff through strong discipleship? And there is the issue about our lifelong call to be disciple makers. It's real. Older people get stood down too early.
yeah.
We're not seeing older people at the front enough. We're not seeing them celebrated. We're not hearing about the valuable work that they're doing. And yet, as you said from the novels, that they have great value. I was talking with one of our church champions recently, and she's got a vast background in Christian ministry for her whole life, evangelistic ministry that she did with her husband, and she's now a leader in the church as a church champion, which is excellent that the church is embracing somebody in her 80s to do that. But she approached the youth leader recently and said, "Look, we're completely behind you. We know some of what you're trying to work through. We've got some experience. Anything we can do, we're here for you. Let us know what we can do for you."
Yeah.
And he went off and thought about it, and he came back and he asked if she would wash the tea towels.
Right.
Um, it's an outrage. And obviously,
Yeah.
she does not despise doing the small things. She wasn't complaining about that. But what a waste, what a waste of all of that experience and wisdom that she's gleaned over the years to be invited to wash the tea towels. And those are the kind of attitudes that we have in our churches up and down the country. And
Yeah.
so
No, that's
we want to
sad.
change that.
Yes. Yeah. I think, more broadly, youth work is a whole topic in itself as to why mostly younger people do youth work. So, let aside retired people, and all the value they could bring, but mostly it's people in their sort of 20s and early 30s who are doing youth work, who have the least experience with the most challenging group. And so
Yeah.
it's difficult to solve. There's all kinds of reasons why it's hard to solve in terms of availability, and if you're in a paid role, how much you can pay. But yeah, um, it is hard. What positively, why do you think churches sometimes do it? Are there any good reasons, like to do with the way old people are, or is it kind of out of love that you think, well, they've served and now they can rest? And because I don't think it's malicious in most cases, is it? Or do you think it is? Is it just ignorance at times, or just lack of attention? If that is happening, I mean, obviously the tea towels one's a bit stark, um, but it's sometimes you may think, well, this person is happy; they're coming along to church still, and I'm being very friendly to them, and they sit down and have their cup of tea with a couple of friends, and that's fine. Perhaps people just don't think about it. Do you think?
Maybe, and we've heard of older people saying that they just feel invisible now,
Yeah,
and they're not being asked for their views. They're not being invited to really actively participate. They're not seen as the solution to any of the church's problems, unless it's perhaps about giving.
yeah,
Then they're very much invited to be a solution.
yeah,
I was talking with a local church minister recently, and he said that Betty, who's in her late 80s, had approached him and said, "Please use me. I want to be involved in the life of the church. I want to be involved in ministry." And he said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And she said, "Just please don't sit me in the corner with a cup of tea and tell me I can pray."
yeah,
And so, again, it's this thing that I don't think people really realize all the potential that's out there. We have a bit of tunnel vision about youth. We know that around the country we have some very interesting sort of mission strategies that actually are blatantly focused on youth. That's in stark contradiction to what the Bible says. The Bible says we have value for the whole of our lives.
mm,
A 17-year-old is no more in need of the good news of Jesus than the 99-year-old. In fact, I would argue that the 99-year-old pretty much needs it pretty urgently today, please,
yeah,
and that we have more time with the 17-year-old. And so I don't think it's malicious. I think it's just the way we are. We are an ageist society. It's often more interesting to look at all the exciting things the young people are doing, and the numbers can be very interesting. Obviously, when great things happen, and
mm,
it's different. It's harder work with older people. Often, we're having to deal with a whole heap of misconceptions. They've been watching the life of the church all their lives, and it's actually harder. Evangelism among older people is harder than it is for younger people. And so I don't know. I'm sure it's not malicious, but it's something we need to shift our focus
yeah,
on, because this is urgent. The Bible says the harvest is plentiful. Um, that we need to be bringing in some of that harvest before the sun goes down on some of these people's lives. And it's urgent.
Do you think older people are the best people to evangelize older people in general? Obviously, it can happen at any age.
Yeah,
Or,
I
or is,
wouldn't I wouldn't like to say they're the best people to do that. I wouldn't like to segregate ministry in that way. I think, intergenerational is the best way forward. God
mm,
designed the church to be a family,
mm,
and yet we know that within our peer groups,
yeah,
we can actually have good traction on some of these fantastic conversations. I've worked in women's ministry a lot over the years. It's, talking woman to woman in a
yes,
similar age group, that has had a much bigger impact than with any other kind of equation. And so,
mm,
and I'm sure it's similar among men, Graham,
yeah,
and among teenagers. And so, yes, of course, to be speaking with and journeying with somebody who's been through some of the things that you've been through, who understands some of your thinking and some of the things that have happened to you, and who's able to speak into that in your language, is very special and very important. So I do believe that, yes, ultimately, peer to peer, any age group, does magnify the impact of sharing the good news and discipleship.
yeah. do you kind of plot's not the word really, but categorize, I suppose, seasons in the sense that there's the early, very active retired, and they're an engine for lots of church service, aren't they? People who've
Yeah.
just recently retired, and probably have a decade or more of being able to have the energy to do quite a lot.
Mm.
That's not to say beyond that they're useless, but they have a sort of season, don't they, for hard work, particularly if they retire a little bit early. And then you've got probably more a season where you're not not so able to help, but you've still got wisdom that you can share. And then you may have a season where you're more a recipient of care because you may have sort of needs develop that mean you can't live independently anymore for whatever reason. Do you sort of observe those seasons?
Yes, absolutely. And how when we enter which season
Mm.
varies between people. We all know the 58-year-old that responds to life like an 88-year-old, and
Yes.
we all know the 88-year-old that
Mm.
responds to life like a 58-year-old. But yes, it's a huge category. I
Yeah.
mean, we're putting like 35 years, an age range of 35 years in one category. When we say later life. And of course, we
Yeah.
wouldn't do that with any other. We wouldn't put a 1-year-old in a group with a 35-year-old, say,
Yes.
and say that's the same. So yeah, there are different challenges,
Yeah.
and as you say, the early retireds. But I think what sort of 65 plus has in common
Hmm.
is that from there on, most of us will begin to experience an increase of bereavement
Yeah.
around us, decreasing social circles because of those bereavements.
Mm.
We will begin to see some health issues. And it may, in your 60s, that could just be, I don't know, eyesight related or hearing related, and those will multiply. But we begin to navigate and we begin to practice for later life. And so
Mm.
it's actually really, if we can navigate those early later life years well, that sets us up well. If we actually fall at the first hurdle when we get our first hearing diagnosis and we fall to pieces over that, and we don't engage and push forward and get the treatment we can get, then that takes us down a trajectory really health-wise for everything
Mm.
else. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. It's not helpful to do it by age bands, but it probably is helpful to I suppose observe it by what people are up to at the time. I mean, I have a guy who lives opposite me here called Joe who used to run a cafe, and he's 82.
Mm,
He goes to work every day with his son who runs a restaurant nearby, and so he has days off. I think Monday's his day off. But other than that, he's in his car at 8 o'clock driving off, and
yeah,
then it comes back about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. So it's not a very long day, but he's working and he's active. And then when he's on his day off, he's cutting the hedge and all that sort of thing.
yeah,
So I would say he's basically as active as I am.
yeah.
Um, and he's 82. Whereas, as there are other 82-year-olds who are quite infirm and confined to home and so on. Just thinking about those two categories of service and evangelism. So using for service, you mentioned some examples of bad sort of practice. Where have you seen older people really thriving in serving in churches? What kinds of things do you think they do really well because of the value of age and wisdom and experience and so on?
Well, I think that kind of is associated with getting to know your people.
Yeah.
And so like you've just said, it really varies what a person can do and wants to do, and actually what has God called them to.
Mm.
And so that comes out of relationship. We need to understand, like Betty, who didn't want to sit in the corner and pray, her minister could not have known her enthusiasm and passion and energy had she, not had that conversation with him. So we need to get to know our older people, and we need to get to know what they'd like to do, what they can do. We know people who are now staying at home. They've lost their mobility to come to church and go out, and yet they are recruited in the life of the church as telephone befrienders
Right.
and prayer warriors, and they
Mhm.
have a fantastic ministry doing that. So, can you remind me what the question was, Graham?
It was more to do with areas where I mean you've given examples of that areas where they can serve well. So
Yes.
um, just if you took that youth example and you thought the youth worker shouldn't have said tea towels, I
Mm.
wonder what he should have said because he probably isn't going to say can you run a game of dodgeball? Um,
No, no. What
Probably.
he probably should have said is, "Thank you for your offer. Shall we have a coffee? I'd love to hear about how God has called you through
Yeah.
your life and what you think you can offer now."
Yeah.
That should have been the response. Whereas he saw what he saw in front of him,
Mm,
which is, in his view, an old lady, and he responded in that way rather than getting to know her. And
mm,
so I would go back to that. We've got to get to know people. But we've seen older people's ministry reignited when they have been noticed, when they have been invited. So
mm,
we have various church champions. They're engaging their older people to deliver the older people's ministry, and suddenly, after years of being stood down as preachers, as evangelists, as singers, as worship leaders, as prayer warriors, they're now being invited up to the front, during the seniors events, and they're back, they're preaching, they're singing a solo, they're praying, they're bringing their life story, and they're sharing the wisdom that they've gleaned over the years. And so we see that done very well when older people are invited to
mm.
come and share. The stories are fantastic. It's so good to hear. And of course, beyond the church ministry, of course, we also have this whole issue of how we're equipping our older friends for ministry beyond the church. A
Mm,
lot of older people, and that's not the case for everyone,
mm,
and decreasingly so, but a lot of older people are grandparents.
mhm.
Some are great grandparents. What a fantastic ministry they have to a generation that the rest of the church is actually trying to reach.
Yeah.
And
Mm,
so they're so well placed. How are we equipping them, encouraging, praying for them in that ministry? A lot of our older people have got friends in care homes. They're walking through those care home doors week by week to visit. How are we helping them to share the good news with care home staff and other residents?
mm,
So yeah, the opportunities are vast, and the church is great at welcoming older people, but it needs to go beyond the welcome. It needs to go beyond pastoral care, and we need to be including older people in our missional strategy. Because as I keep saying to everybody,
yeah.
time's running out.
Yeah. 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 We in our own church have the most non-Christians actually in our old people's ministry.
Brilliant.
At some of those key events, if you just add up the numbers, and particularly in terms of regular, um,
Mm,
it's the most. I mean, we have non-Christians in youth work, and we have non-Christians in the main gatherings of the church as well. But in sort of in one place is the most, which is quite it's quite challenging, particularly because probably we as a church, it kind of just happened organically. We strategically enabled it and encouraged it, but I'm not sure as a leadership we absolutely put all our weight behind it. But in God's
mm,
providence and goodness, it's a really big work now. So I would encourage people listening to that it's actually not just a couple of people having a coffee who then sort of go off and you never see them again. But the opportunities are definitely there. There's a hardness because people have lived a whole life and made lots of mini decisions about Christianity on the way. But there is more opportunity and lots of time in our observation, and some of those people have come through to faith, which has
mm.
been amazing. In terms of outreach to people who are older, we've mentioned that the Who, that anyone could do it, but older people can often have things in common with older people who are Christians. What kinds of things in your experience across churches are working well in terms of reaching older people who are not Christians?
Mm. It varies very much. So people are doing a whole range of things. So there are midweek events that
Mm,
go on, especially for seniors. Sort of magazine style events, just short little segments across an hour, helping people to engage with interesting things and with the good news of Jesus. We've got warm spaces all over the place that are welcoming lots of older people week by week. And there's also, there's ukulele events, there's chair exercise classes, there's all sorts of things that are going on in churches all over the place. One of the things that works very well is the classic coffee morning.
mm,
Invite people in and begin conversations. Have a few people there ready to talk with people. We've found that people who come to even just a coffee morning begin to talk about that church as their church.
Yes.
And so, it may take time for them to transition, but we know that when those people who come to coffee mornings, when they suffer bereavement or family crisis, they deepen their conversations with those people at the church, and they are ministered to, and things can develop. So those are great things to do. We just need to be really good at welcoming, but we do need that intentionality. It can't just be a club where you have a cheap coffee. We need to be sharing the good news. We need to be using those coffee mornings as springboards. Invite them to a seniors alpha course, invite them to a Bible study, invite them to come and explore, or come and witness a baptism, all of these things. And beyond that, churches are really very good. And some churches struggle because they don't have the resources, and that's fair enough. But many churches are taking little teams into their local care homes, reaching people who, quite frankly, are now the hardest to reach because they won't be coming to church. They haven't got long left on this earth, and they are suffering all kinds of health issues. And churches are going in, they're sharing the good news of Jesus. They're helping people to know more about God, and they are loving those people through those interactions.
Let's just speak for a moment about isolation and ageism. What would you define as ageism, and how does that sort of connect with people becoming isolated?
Yes. So ageism is well, they say it's the last kind of form of discrimination that's socially acceptable. It starts with little jokes and jibes and fun birthday cards. It starts with language of how we describe older people, and yet it goes much deeper because it shapes attitudes of worth around older people, and it's had a massive impact altogether on the way people are treated in the healthcare system, the way that over 50s even are treated in the workplace. And these things have a massive impact on our later life flourishing. A person who feels that they have to retire early or retire at retirement time because they're not really being embraced and encouraged in the workplace, they're likely to be poorer in later life. They're likely to be less purposeful. Some will suffer an identity crisis if they don't want to finish work. And all of these things have a massive impact. So this ageism, which seems really subtle, actually can run very deep, and it has a big impact. People who feel then altogether that they aren't worth anything because of their age, because of their diminishing abilities, let's say, they actually have a different response to their own needs. So you'll find older people not necessarily going to the doctors, not going for those appointments, not having treatment that could save their lives, not looking after themselves, not eating well, smoking and things that actually harm them because they've decided, well, no point now, I'm on my way out, and it doesn't matter. And so we have this self-ageism that creeps in. And so yeah, it's really bad for society. It's really bad for our health. And again, it is in stark contradiction to the Bible, who says that, we will flourish all of our lives, and we are of great value. The Bible stories show it. We've got Simeon and Anna in the temple, very old, and all he was very old and very faithful. How can we help people to do that? We shouldn't discriminate on age. God can use us and bless us at all ages, but the way it leads to isolation is again a lower participation in community and life, because when your worth is down, you don't engage with everything.
Yeah, what's really interesting what you just said, which is kind of new to me thinking about it, and I do experience. I turned 60 just recently, and to experience it, I'm not complaining at all, but it is hard to work out what joking is normal, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
My own family joke about it. Sometimes if I, send a wrong message on WhatsApp or something, they'll just send me an old man icon back, emoji, and
yeah,
that's fine at one level, but I suppose it's this bit like lots of joking is, it's like, joking about people who have medical conditions or are overweight or underweight or all those things. it's a lot about context and relationship and about frequency, I suppose, as well, to say whether the joking is just normal interaction with another human being that you love and you're in relationship with, or whether it's actually betraying, a genuine discrimination. That's my observation. My kids will sometimes take the mick out of me, but I don't worry that they actually have put me in a box and have categorized me.
Yes. No,
So,
and you're right. We can go over the top with some of this, and I think I think Clinton Cards did some research about some of the kind of fun getting older cards,
yeah,
and I think the research showed that the older people themselves actually think they're funny, and they're the ones buying them. But that's the issue is younger people seeing them and
yes,
thinking, oh, okay, over 60 means you're past it.
yeah,
Over 60 means it's all downhill from here, because those are the messages they're getting.
yes,
And, that's just a small seed that gets sown. And we've seen some research last year from Pilgrim's Friend Society that showed over half of people are afraid of later life.
yeah,
Later life is not being portrayed as something good in society. And so it leads to fear, which interestingly, fear and stress leads to, faster paced aging,
mm,
which is more likely to lead to some of the outcomes that you're afraid of.
yeah,
And so we want to fill people with hope. People sometimes say to me, "Oh, you work with older people," and I say, "No, I work with anyone who's breathing."
yeah,
Because if we're breathing, we're aging, and we all need to shift our focus. I want a child to know he or she will be loved by God for the whole of their lives. And, how you and I invest in our health today will impact our later life outcomes. So it's huge. And yeah, ageism is, it depends very much, but it's serious as well, especially in the workplace. We know there's a lot of pensioner poverty around, and that is being exacerbated by ageism in the workplace, for example.
mm, mm. No, it's really helpful. What would be great, some really good challenges in what you've said. Just tell us where we can find out more about faith in later life as we draw things to a close.
If anybody who'd like to find out more about faith in later life, you can head over to our website at faithinlaterlife.org. We've also got Facebook page, Instagram, and X. So follow us on there, where we show some ideas and prayers and different things like that. I'm very happy to talk with church leaders on a one-to-one or across denominations. I do some training and I speak at some denominational conferences. If anybody would like to, and of course, we invite people to come and be church champions. And we've got more information about that on our website.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much for that. I've really enjoyed. There wasn't two of us today. There's normally two of us, but there's only one of us. I've really enjoyed speaking with you today. And people willing to be listening. There's some big challenges about how we use people in our church, how we serve people in our church, how we reach people beyond our church who are elderly, and how we make sure that we're not practicing ageism in a way that isolates people. So loads of challenges in there, and lots of information on the Faith in Later Life website. Thank you very much, Alex, for your time, and
thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to Affinity Talks Gospel Podcast. Affinity is a network of evangelical churches and Christian organizations working together, sharing stories in order to encourage and equip God's people to preach and live the gospel in this generation. If you're interested in supporting this ministry, we'd love you to join us. Just head over to affinity.org.uk/join to find out more. And we look forward to catching up with you on the next episode of Affinity Talks Gospel.